You probably know Muammar Gaddafi, Libya's ruler for decades and one of Africa's most controversial leaders. But what you might not know is that he spent years, sometimes in the open, sometimes in the shadows, backing liberation movements and rebel forces across the continent. With Libya's oil wealth behind him, he handed out cash, weapons, training, and political support. From Nelson Mandela's liberation to some of Africa's bloodiest wars, this is how Muammar Gaddafi bankrolled revolutions across the continent. In the late 1980s, a young Liberian rebel walked out of a Libyan training camp with a plan that would plunge his country into 7 years of bloodshed. Some called him a freedom fighter, others called him a warlord. Charles Taylor called himself Liberia's next president, and Muammar Gaddafi helped make it happen. At the time, Liberia was under Samuel Doe, a corrupt United States-backed dictator. For Gaddafi, that was reason enough to act. Supporting Taylor and his National Patriotic Front of Liberia meant countering United States influence in West Africa while staying true to his habit of backing movements that defied the established world order. Taylor's rebels launched their insurgency in December 1989, and Gaddafi's support was extensive: weapons, money, and military training. Taylor himself had trained in Libya, and so had many of his men. At Taylor's later war crimes trial, a former ally called Moses Blah testified that he was among about 200 fighters trained in Libya in 1989 for the NPFL. The result of Taylor's insurgency was catastrophic. With Libyan help, the NPFL tore through the country, helping dismantle Samuel Doe's government and triggering a civil war marked by massacres, mass displacement, and unimaginable atrocities. Taylor's eventual presidency was a direct outcome of this conflict. But Charles Taylor wasn't the only warlord forged in Gaddafi's desert camps. Among the recruits was Fofana Sano, a former army corporal from Sierra Leone and the leader of the infamous RUF. In the chaos of war, some groups stand out for their sheer brutality, often enabled by powerful patrons. Sierra Leone's Revolutionary United Front, notorious for its horrific tactics, received such enabling support from Muammar Gaddafi. Fofana Sano led the RUF, a rebel group allied with Charles Taylor's NPFL in Liberia. Back in the 1970s, Fofana Sano had spent time in exile in Libya. There he received military training and absorbed Gaddafi's revolutionary ideology, even studying his Green Book. That training, combined with weapons and logistical support flowing through Gaddafi's network, often routed via Charles Taylor, gave Fofana Sano and the RUF the capacity to launch its devastating insurgency in 1991. Some reports from the mid-1990s suggested Libya supplied funds, weapons, and even airdropped arms to the RUF, bolstering their ability to fight. This external backing not only prolonged Sierra Leone's civil war, but also interconnected the conflicts in Liberia and Sierra Leone into one regional crisis. For Gaddafi, the RUF was another way to project power in West Africa, while for Sierra Leone, it was the start of a decade-long nightmare, a war that left tens of thousands dead, and the country synonymous with the horrors of blood diamonds. But not every cause that Muammar Gaddafi funded ended in blood and ruin. Thousands of kilometers to the south, his money, weapons, and political influence were helping to dismantle one of the most entrenched systems of oppression in modern history: apartheid in South Africa. South Africa's African National Congress is the country's oldest liberation movement. Founded in 1912, it led the struggle against apartheid and has governed South Africa since 1994. From the 1970s through the 1990s, Muammar Gaddafi was one of the ANC's most dependable allies. While many Western governments kept trading with the apartheid government, Libya was sending money, weapons, and training to the ANC's armed wing, the Umkhonto weSizwe. Gaddafi gave them diplomatic cover too, lobbying African and Arab nations to isolate South Africa's apartheid regime. For Muammar Gaddafi, bringing down apartheid was a way to challenge the global order and push his Pan-African anti-imperialist vision. During this time, Libya also opened its doors to other anti-apartheid movements, for example the PAC, the Black People's Convention, and the South African Students' Organization. All of these were allowed to train on Libyan soil and received financial support. Gaddafi extended similar help to SWAPO in Namibia, where South Africa had imposed its own apartheid system. In the West, this support drew suspicion. They saw Gaddafi's backing of these groups through the same lens as his support for movements they deemed terrorists like the PLO and the IRA. But for the ANC, Gaddafi's help was critical. When Nelson Mandela walked free in 1990, one of his first trips was to Tripoli, Libya, to thank Gaddafi. 4 years later, he invited him to his inauguration and in 1997 awarded him South Africa's highest honor for foreign dignitaries. Nelson Mandela even helped ease Libya's tensions with the West over the Lockerbie bombing. But far to the north, Gaddafi's alliances looked very different. Here, across the Sahara, he found common cause with the Torics, nomadic fighters whose rebellions would flare up again and again in Mali and Niger. For years, Tuareg fighters from Mali and Niger, often marginalized and displaced, found an unlikely patron in Muammar Gaddafi. The connection was partly ideological. The Tuaregs were fellow Berber-speaking desert people who shared cultural and ethnic ties with Libya. The connection was also strategic. Their long-standing grievances gave Gaddafi leverage to pressure rival governments in the Sahel, many of which were aligned with the West. Gaddafi provided the Tuaregs with weapons, training camps and funding. Many of them joined Libya's military, while others served as mercenaries in his regional ventures. In 2009, he even brokered an end to a Tuareg rebellion in Mali and Niger, reportedly distributing millions of dollars to insurgents. When the Libyan uprising erupted in 2011, many of these fighters returned to support Gaddafi, recruited with promises of dollars and weapons. The consequences of this support and recruitment were far-reaching. Post-Gaddafi's fall, hundreds of Tuareg tribesmen returned to northern Mali with large amounts of ammunition, contributing to regional instability, fueling new conflicts and making Mali and Niger vulnerable to instability. But Gaddafi's desert connections didn't end with the Tuaregs. Further west, along the windswept dunes of the Sahara, another group of fighters also drew his attention, the Polisario Front, locked in a decades-long struggle over Western Sahara. The Polisario Front was born in 1973, just as Spanish colonial rule in Western Sahara was crumbling. Their mission was simple: push out the colonizers and win independence for the Sahrawi people. But when Spain finally pulled out in 1975, independence never came. Morocco quickly moved in to claim most of the territory, and Mauritania took the rest. The Polisario fought back hard. They forced Mauritania to withdraw. But Morocco dug in, building a huge sand wall across the desert, guarded by troops, landmines, and fortifications. Now, by the late 1970s and early 1980s, Muammar Gaddafi stepped in as a key backer of Polisario, sending weapons, cash, and training. It was classic Gaddafi, positioning himself against what he viewed as foreign occupation. This support from Gaddafi boosted the Polisario's ability to keep the fight going, prolonging the war over Western Sahara. Morocco hated it, but across much of Africa, sympathy for the Polisario was strong. Still, Gaddafi's alliances rarely lasted forever. By the late 1980s, regional politics shifted, reconciliation efforts began, and his support cooled. This conflict froze in place. Morocco held about 80% of the land, while the Polisario ran the free zone east of the sand wall. Well, Muammar Gaddafi's influence wasn't confined to West Africa, Southern Africa, or the Sahara. This man was prolific. He was just as active in the Horn of Africa, where shifting alliances and Cold War rivalries made the perfect stage for his brand of power politics. Here in the Horn of Africa, his most notable partner was Ethiopia's Marxist strongman Mengistu Haile Mariam. During the 1970s, when Gaddafi was at the height of his influence and oil wealth, he first supported the Eritrean rebels against the government of Emperor Haile Selassie in Ethiopia. Gaddafi then switched sides to support the revolutionary government of Mengistu Haile Mariam. Mengistu's Derg regime, which overthrew Emperor Haile Selassie in 1974, was Marxist-oriented and known for its women's rights abuses during the Red Terror campaign. Gaddafi provided military, financial, and ideological support to Mengistu's regime throughout the 1970s and 1980s. By the end of the 1980s, Gaddafi had provided significant military aid to Ethiopia to counter the escalating Eritrean revolution. The impact of this support helped sustain Mengistu's authoritarian rule and his regime's military efforts against internal and external opposition. This relationship, however, came to an end after Ethiopia restored relations with Israel. Following this, Gaddafi redirected his support to independent Eritrea, which subsequently benefited significantly from Libyan generosity in areas such as mining, maritime economy, and oil, alongside political support for the regime of Isaias Afwerki. Before we get to our final and perhaps most infamous example, it's worth remembering that Muammar Gaddafi's reach went far beyond the major players we have looked at so far. Across Africa and even beyond, he poured resources into a staggering number of causes, allies, and experiments in power. Gaddafi supported the Sudan People's Liberation Army in South Sudan, even while promoting his own brand of political Islam. He propped up Jean Bedel Bokassa in the Central African Republic, a man so swayed by Gaddafi's influence that he briefly converted to Islam. Then there was the Islamic Legion, a force made up of fighters across Africa, and even recruits from Bangladesh and Pakistan, which Gaddafi used to advance his aims in conflicts like the Toyota War in Chad. And Chad, well, that was one of his favorite chessboards. For decades, Gaddafi meddled in its politics and civil wars, sometimes as the shadow player, other times as the main instigator. Muammar Gaddafi also worked the diplomatic front, persuading roughly 30 African governments to cut ties with Israel. And in doing so, he forged bonds with some of the most notorious leaders of the era, including one, Idi Amin Dada. When a brutal dictator faced overwhelming odds, one unlikely ally stepped in to try and save him. That ally was Muammar Gaddafi. The dictator was Uganda's Idi Amin. Their relationship went back years. Gaddafi saw Amin as a fellow Muslim leader who could be pulled into his orbit of pan-Islamism and pan-African solidarity. He showered Amin with financial aid, weapons, and political backing, encouraging his anti-Zionist turn and his break from Israel in favor of Arab allies. The two men shared grand visions of defying Western influence, even if Amin's methods were as erratic as they were brutal. Now, from the moment Idi Amin seized power in 1971, his relationship with Tanzanian President Julius Nyerere was poisoned. Nyerere had been close to Milton Obote, the man Amin overthrew, and gave him asylum in Tanzania, even allowing Ugandan exiles to train there. Over the years, the tension turned into open hostility, and Amin's political killings and territorial ambitions only deepened the rift. The breaking point came in October 1978 when Amin's troops crossed into Tanzania's Kagera region and claimed it as Ugandan land. Nyerere's retaliation was swift. Tanzanian forces, backed by Ugandan rebels, pushed Amin's army out and kept going. This is when Gaddafi made his move. Most sources agree that Muammar Gaddafi sent about 2,000 Libyan troops, along with several shipments of arms, ammunition, and military equipment, plus millions of dollars in cash to support Idi Amin during this 1978 to 1979 Uganda-Tanzania war. For a short while, it worked. But in April 1979, Kampala fell. Amin fled into exile, first to Libya, where Gaddafi gave him refuge, and later to Saudi Arabia. Gaddafi's gamble didn't save his friend, but it showed just how far he was willing to go to defend leaders who aligned with his vision, even if it meant backing one of Africa's most feared dictators. Don't forget to like and share the video if you enjoyed it. Thank you all for tuning in. This has been Tatenda for African Biographics. Until next time, cheers. Have a good one.